Have you ever wondered what reason could drive a father to bring his pregnant mistress to his family's Thanksgiving dinner and command his own daughter to serve her first while his wife of 35 years sits there watching? That November evening, when my father, Robert Thompson, CEO of Thompson Holdings, walked Veronica through our dining room door and declared, "Serve her first, she's pregnant," my mother fled the room in tears after 35 years of marriage. But I remained perfectly still. Not because I was weak or paralyzed with shock, but because concealed inside the turkey I was about to carve was something that would transform everything. A recording device that had been capturing every conversation in his office for the past 6 months. 6 months of evidence documenting not just his affair, but his systematic theft of $8.2 million from my mother's retirement fund. I'm Miranda Thompson, 32 years old, and this is the story of the day I decided silence was no longer an option. If you're watching this, please subscribe, and let me know where you are watching from. Growing up as Robert Thompson's daughter meant living in the shadow of an empire. Thompson Holdings, the $450 million conglomerate my grandfather built from nothing, had become my father's kingdom. And in kingdoms, daughters are meant to be seen, not heard. Despite my MBA from Wharton and the fact that I'd grown my own marketing consultancy's revenue by 340% in just 3 years, my father still introduced me at board meetings as my little girl who plays with social media. The irony wasn't lost on me. My playing had secured 3 Fortune 500 clients last quarter alone, contracts worth more than some of his division heads brought in annually. "Marketing is just decoration, sweetheart," he'd said at last month's board meeting, his hand dismissively waving as I presented a strategic expansion plan. "Real business requires a man's touch." The 12 board members, 11 men and Patricia Chen, our CFO, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Patricia's eyes met mine for a brief moment, a flash of sympathy quickly hidden behind professional neutrality. What stung most wasn't the dismissal itself, but the fact that I owned 5% of Thompson Holdings shares, inherited from my grandfather, who'd believed in me when no one else did. Those shares gave me the right to attend board meetings, to vote on major decisions, yet my father had systematically excluded me from every significant discussion for 8 years. Email chains would mysteriously skip my address. Meeting invitations would arrive an hour after they'd started. Strategic documents would be accidentally left off my desk. The question everyone asked, why did I stay? Why endure it? The answer was simple. My mother. Margaret Thompson had been a rising star at Preston and Associates law firm when she met my father in 1989. She'd just won a landmark discrimination case. Her name was in the Seattle Times, and 3 firms were courting her for partner positions. Then she fell in love with Robert Thompson's charm, his promises, his vision of a perfect family. Within a year, she'd traded her briefcase for an apron, her courtroom for a kitchen, believing she was choosing love. 35 years later, my mother controlled nothing. Not the $12 million inheritance from her mother that Robert had invested for our future. Not the household accounts he monitored, because you never were good with numbers, darling. Not even the car in her name that required his signature for any maintenance over $500. I'd watched her shrink over the years, from the fierce woman who'd fought for justice to someone who apologized for existing. In 2019, she'd gathered enough courage to mention divorce after finding lipstick on his collar, not her shade. Robert's response was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He'd cried, actually cried, swearing it meant nothing, that she was his whole world, that he'd die without her. Then came the subtle threats wrapped in concern. "Who would take care of you? You haven't worked in decades. Do you really want to be alone at your age?" She stayed. Of course she stayed. Where else would she go? That's why in May of this year, when I accidentally overheard a phone call that would change everything, I knew I couldn't just walk away. Some chains you can't break alone. Sometimes you need to destroy the entire lock. The call that changed everything came on May 15th at 4:47 p.m. I'd stopped by my father's home office to drop off quarterly reports when I heard his voice through the mahogany door, low and calculating. Margaret's money is practically mine anyway. Transfer another 2 million to the Cayman account next week. My hand froze on the doorknob. Through the crack, I could see him pacing, phone pressed to his ear, completely unaware of my presence. No, she'll never check. The old woman trusts me completely. He laughed, actually laughed, at my mother's faith in him. By December 15th, everything will be in place. 35 years of marriage in Washington state means a 50-50 split, unless… He paused, listening. Exactly. If the assets have already been invested poorly or lost in bad ventures, there's nothing to split. 6 offshore accounts, $8.2 million systematically drained from my mother's inheritance over 18 months. The receipts I'd found later showed transfers to the Caymans, Switzerland, and Panama. A careful web designed to look like failed investments if anyone bothered to investigate. But that wasn't even the worst part. Veronica Hayes, his 28-year-old executive assistant, already had a trust fund established in her name with $3 million of my mother's money. The baby she claimed to carry would inherit everything while my mother would be left with nothing but the house, which was mortgaged to the hilt without her knowledge. That night, I made a decision. I ordered an Apex 3000 recording device online, the kind private investigators use. Voice-activated, 180-day battery life, admissible in court. Within 48 hours, it was hidden in the Italian leather penholder my mother had given him for their 30th anniversary. Poetic justice has its moments. 3 weeks until December 15th. That's all the time I had when Thanksgiving rolled around. 3 weeks before my father would file divorce papers through Morrison & Associates, Seattle's most ruthless family law firm. The same one that had destroyed Senator Williams in his divorce last year, leaving him with nothing but his car. The urgency ate at me every day. November had been a careful dance of gathering evidence while maintaining the facade of the dutiful, overlooked daughter. My mother, meanwhile, was planning their 36th anniversary celebration for January, completely unaware that my father had already paid a $50,000 retainer to ensure she'd never see that date as a married woman. The recording device had captured everything, 127 files of pure betrayal. But recordings alone wouldn't be enough. I needed corroboration, documentation, a trail that even Morrison & Associates couldn't dismiss. That's when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Veronica Hayes wasn't just his mistress. She was his former employee at Thompson Holdings, fired 3 years ago for embezzlement, charges my father had personally made disappear. The pattern became clear. This wasn't a love affair gone wrong. This was a calculated business partnership. Veronica knew where the bodies were buried at Thompson Holdings, and my father was paying for her silence with my mother's money. The baby? Just another piece of leverage in their twisted game. But every chess match has a weakness. Robert Thompson's was his ego, his absolute need to be seen as the perfect businessman, the devoted family man, the pillar of Seattle's corporate community. He'd built his entire identity on that image. I was about to tear it all down. The only question was, would 3 weeks be enough time? November 26th, 6:00 p.m. The Thompson family. Thanksgiving was supposed to be perfect. It always was. My mother had spent 3 days preparing. Turkey brined in rosemary, sweet potato souffle from scratch, her grandmother's cranberry sauce recipe that took 8 hours to perfect. The dining room gleamed with the china we only used twice a year. 12 place settings for the extended family who'd driven from Portland, Spokane, and Vancouver. By 6:15, everyone had arrived. Uncle David and Aunt Helen, my cousins Sarah and Michael with their kids, even my father's brother James, who usually avoided family gatherings. The house filled with laughter, children running through hallways, adults sharing wine in the living room. My mother glowed with the satisfaction of bringing everyone together. At 6:23, the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," my father announced, though no one else was expected. He returned to the dining room with his arm around a woman in a tight red dress that left nothing to imagination. Veronica Hayes, diamonds glittering at her throat, her hand deliberately placed on her slightly rounded stomach. Everyone, my father's voice commanded the room's attention. This is Veronica. She's joining us for dinner. The silence was deafening. My mother's face went white, the serving spoon clattering from her hand onto the china platter. Robert? Aunt Helen gasped. What is this? She's pregnant with my child. He said it like announcing quarterly earnings. Matter of fact, no emotion. 7 months along. It's time everyone knew. My mother stood frozen. Uncle David's jaw dropped. The children, sensing danger the way children do, pressed closer to their parents. And Veronica? She smiled, rubbing her belly in slow, deliberate circles. Serve her first, my father commanded, looking directly at me. She needs proper nutrition. My mother's legs gave out. She didn't fall. It was more like a slow collapse, her hand gripping the table edge as 35 years of marriage crumbled in front of 12 witnesses. Robert, she whispered, her voice breaking. 35 years. How could you? Sit down, Margaret. His tone was ice. Don't make a scene in front of the family. That's when Veronica decided to twist the knife. Oh, the baby's kicking. She grabbed my cousin Sarah's hand, placing it on her stomach. He's going to be such a strong boy, just like his daddy. Sarah yanked her hand back as if burned. Uncle David stood up, his Marine Corps training evident in his posture. Robert, you son of a... David, my father's CEO voice cut through. This is my house, my family, my decision. My mother ran, not walked, not excused herself, ran from the room, her sob echoing through the hallway. We heard the back door slam, then nothing. Well, my father surveyed the stunned faces around the table. Miranda, I gave you an instruction. Serve Veronica first. Aunt Helen found her voice. Robert Thompson, you're a monster. I'm a man who knows what he wants. He pulled out the chair at my mother's place. Veronica, sit here. You're family now. My cousins were already gathering their children, heading for the door. Uncle James hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but his knuckles were white around his wine glass. And me? I stood perfectly still, counting my heartbeat. 147 beats per minute. 148. 149. Every instinct screamed to follow my mother, to comfort her. But I had a different plan, one that required me to stay calm for just a few more minutes. I'll get the turkey, I said. Good girl, my father said, the condescension dripping like honey. Finally being useful for once. I walked to the kitchen with measured steps, my hands steady despite the rage burning in my chest. The turkey sat on the counter, 20 pounds of perfectly roasted tradition that my mother had been basting since dawn. I picked up the carving knife, tested its edge with my thumb, sharp enough to cut through more than just meat. The dining room had descended into hostile silence when I returned, carrying the massive platter. Half the family had already left. Uncle David stood by the door, coat on, waiting for Aunt Helen. My cousins were gone. Only Uncle James remained seated, watching my father with an expression I couldn't read. I set the turkey down in the center of the table. The knife glinted under the chandelier light. Before I carve, I announced, my voice carrying the same authority I used in boardrooms. There's something everyone should know. My father's eyebrow arched. Miranda, just serve the food. I plunged the knife into the turkey's cavity, feeling for the package I'd hidden there that morning, while helping my mother with preparations. My fingers found the plastic-wrapped device, still warm from the oven's residual heat. This, I pulled out the Apex 3000, holding it up for everyone to see, has been recording in your office since May 15th. The color drained from my father's face. Veronica's hand flew to her mouth. Uncle James leaned forward, suddenly very interested. 6 months of conversations, Robert. Every call to your lawyers, every transfer to the Cayman accounts, every discussion about stealing Mom's inheritance. I set the device on the table. Including your chat about Veronica's fake pregnancy and the forged ultrasounds, the room exploded. Has your family ever faced this level of betrayal? Let me know in the comments what consequences you think Robert deserves. And if this story is touching your heart, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss what's coming next. Because what I'm about to reveal will change absolutely everything. But let me back up for a moment. You don't destroy a man like Robert Thompson with just recordings. The night I'd hidden that device in his office, I knew I needed bulletproof authentication. That's where Data Forensics LLC came in, the same firm the FBI used in the Microsoft antitrust case. For $15,000, they documented every file, timestamps, voice pattern analysis, chain of custody affidavits. Their report was 200 pages of irrefutable evidence, admissible in any court in Washington state. I'd made 3 copies, one in my safety deposit box, one with my lawyer, and one uploaded to a secured cloud server that would automatically release to the Seattle Times if anything happened to me. The financial trails was even more damning. Using my marketing company's IT contractor, someone who owed me a favor from when I'd saved his startup, I'd accessed Thomson Holdings' email servers through a backdoor my father didn't even know existed. 34 emails between Robert and Veronica, discussing everything from offshore accounts to forged signatures, each one archived, authenticated, and cross-referenced with bank records. Wells Fargo had been surprisingly helpful once I'd shown them evidence of fraud. Turns out, banks don't like being accomplices to embezzlement. They'd provided 18 months of transaction records, each transfer flagged and traced. The pattern was clear. $8.2 million moved in increments small enough to avoid federal reporting requirements, but large enough to destroy my mother's future. Every piece of evidence followed Federal Rule 901 for authentication. Every recording was legally obtained. Washington's two-party consent law doesn't apply when there's criminal activity being discussed in a business office. I'd done my homework. My father thought he was playing chess. He didn't realize I'd already won 3 moves ago. What my father didn't know was that he'd been losing allies for months. Patricia Smith, our CFO who'd replaced the retired Mr. Chen, had noticed discrepancies in the books back in August. She'd come to me privately, concerned about irregularities she couldn't explain. I'd shown her just enough evidence to confirm her suspicions, and she'd been quietly documenting everything on her end ever since. 3 board members, Jonathan Hayes, Richard Martinez, and Susan Walsh, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Robert's autocratic style. They'd been shut out of major decisions, their concerns dismissed, their votes marginalized. When I'd carefully approached them in October, suggesting they might want to pay closer attention to the November 28th shareholders meeting, they'd understood the subtext immediately. But the real ace up my sleeve was James Morrison, the largest individual shareholder with 18% of Thomson Holdings. My father only controlled 15%, despite being CEO. Morrison had mentored my father in the early days, helped build the company alongside my grandfather. He'd watched Robert's transformation from hungry entrepreneur to corrupt tyrant with growing disgust. Your grandfather would be spinning in his grave, Morrison had told me over coffee 3 weeks ago, after I'd shared my evidence. He built this company on integrity. Roberts turned it into his personal piggy bank. Morrison had given me something invaluable, the exact procedural requirements for an emergency board vote. Section 12.3 of the corporate bylaws, written by my grandfather himself, allowed any shareholder with over 5% stake to present evidence of fiduciary misconduct at any official meeting. The board would be legally obligated to investigate and vote on immediate removal if fraud was proven. The November 28th annual shareholders meeting was in 2 days. My father's favorite stage was about to become his courtroom. Back in the dining room, I pressed play on the device. My father's voice filled the space, crystal clear, despite being recorded through leather and wood. Margaret's money is mine to manage anyway. She's too stupid to know the difference between a real investment and a shell company. My mother had returned, standing in the doorway, her face streaked with tears, but her spine suddenly straight. The recording continued. Transfer another $2 million to the Veronica Hayes Trust next week. Tell the bank it's for real estate development. Veronica's recorded voice responded, "What about your daughter? What if she finds out?" "Miranda?" My father's laugh on the recording was cruel. "She's weak, just like her mother, too scared to ever stand up to me." Uncle James stood slowly, his face darkening. The real Robert, sitting at the table, had gone from pale to purple. That's edited. It's fake. You can't." I clicked to another file. May 22nd, 3:15 p.m. His voice again. "The divorce papers are ready. December 15th, Margaret gets nothing but the house. The prenup I had her sign in '89 was genius. She never even read it." "There was no prenup," my mother said quietly from the doorway. "I would have remembered." "File 89, I continued, scrolling through the device's menu. June 10th. Robert Thompson instructing Veronica Hayes on how to forge Margaret Thompson's signature on withdrawal forms. The recording played, "Make the M loop higher. Margaret never dots her I's. Perfect. The bank won't question it if it comes from my office." "You monster," Aunt Helen breathed. "You absolute monster." Uncle David already had his phone out. "I'm calling my lawyer and the police." "File 47, I announced, clicking through the menu while my father sat frozen. July 18th, Robert explaining to Veronica how to fake pregnancy documents. The recording was damning. "The ultrasound clinic on Pine Street doesn't verify insurance. Pay cash, use a fake name. We need documentation showing 7 months when you're really only 4. Veronica shot up from her chair. "You said it was foolproof. You said no one would ever know." "Shut up!" Robert snarled at her, his mask finally slipping completely. I continued relentlessly. File 112, September 3rd. Detailed discussion of the $8.2 million already transferred through 6 offshore accounts. The recording played his voice listing account numbers, amounts, dates. A complete confession. File 95. August 14th. Robert Thompson and Morrison and Associates planning the December 15th divorce filing. The lawyer's voice was clear. "If you file before the 36-year mark, the asset division is more favorable. After 36 years, Washington state law makes hiding assets nearly impossible." My mother walked fully into the room now, each step deliberate. $8.2 million? That was my mother's money. She left it to me, not you. "It was invested." Robert slammed his fist on the table, making the china jump. "I was protecting you from your own incompetence. By giving it to your pregnant mistress?" My mother's voice could have frozen hell. Uncle James finally spoke, his voice carrying the authority of his military years. "Robert, I've known you for 30 years. I helped build this company with your father. And right now, I'm ashamed I ever called you friend." "This is just a family preview," I announced, looking directly at my father. "Tomorrow morning, all 47 shareholders get copies. The SEC gets copies. The Washington State Attorney General gets copies." My father lunged to his feet, his chair crashing backward. "You little bitch! You're finished! I'll destroy your career! No company in Seattle will ever hire you!" "Really?" I remained seated, calm as a frozen lake. "Check your email, Robert." He pulled out his phone with shaking hands. His face went from purple to white as he read. "What did you do?" he whispered. "I sent everything to the board, the shareholders, the SEC, the FBI's white-collar crime division, the Washington State Attorney General, the Seattle Times business editor." I glanced at my watch. "The emails went out at 6:47 p.m., about 3 minutes ago." "You can't! I'll sue you for defamation. Corporate espionage. I'll take everything you have." "With what money?" I asked. "The accounts are already frozen. Patricia Smith and Wells Fargo's fraud department worked together this afternoon. Emergency injunction, signed by Judge Harrison at 4 p.m. today." Veronica was backing toward the door. "This wasn't supposed to happen. You promised me." "Sit down, Veronica," I said sharply. "The police are already outside. Uncle David called them 10 minutes ago, didn't you?" David nodded. The moment you pulled out that device, they've been listening on speaker. My father looked around wildly, like a trapped animal. His empire, built on our family's destruction, was crumbling in real time. His phone buzzed incessantly. Board members, lawyers, reporters already getting wind of the story. The truth doesn't need your permission to exist, I said, standing finally. And tomorrow, at the shareholders' meeting, everyone will know exactly who Robert Thompson really is. You've destroyed everything, he roared. No, my mother said quietly from behind me. You did that all by yourself. November 28th, 10 o'clock a.m. The Thompson Holdings boardroom on the 45th floor had never been this packed. 47 shareholders filled every seat, 12 board members lined the walls, 3 auditors from Ernst & Young sat with laptops open. The Seattle Times had somehow gotten wind of an emergency situation. Their business reporter waited in the lobby with a photographer. My father entered like he still owned the world, his trademark navy suit impeccable, his stride confident. He'd spent the last 36 hours on damage control, his lawyers working overtime to spin the narrative. As he took his position at the head of the table, you'd never know his world was ending. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his CEO voice smooth as aged whiskey. Before we discuss this year's record revenues, I need to address some malicious rumors. I stood. Point of order. Every head turned. I wasn't supposed to be here. Minor shareholders rarely attended. But my 5% stake gave me the right, and more importantly, Section 12.3 of the bylaws gave me the floor. Miranda, my father's voice carried a warning. This isn't the time. According to Section 12.3 of Thompson Holdings corporate bylaws, I continued, walking to the presentation podium, any shareholder with more than 5% stake can present evidence of fiduciary misconduct requiring immediate board attention. I handed a USB drive to Patricia Smith. CFO Smith, would you please load this presentation? Patricia's fingers flew across her laptop. The main screen flickered to life. What you're about to see, I announced to the room, is documented evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty by CEO Robert Thompson, totaling $8.2 million in stolen funds. The room erupted in whispers. My father's confident mask finally cracked. The screen filled with Excel spreadsheets. 18 months of fraudulent transfers, each one highlighted in red. Patricia Smith stood, her voice clinical. These transactions were hidden across 6 departments, small enough to avoid triggering automatic audits, but totaling $8.2 million diverted from Thompson Holdings and the Thompson Family Trust. I clicked to the next slide. Audio evidence, authenticated by Data Forensics LLC. My father's voice boomed through the boardroom speakers. Transfer another $2 million to the Cayman account. Margaret's too stupid to notice. Gasps rippled through the room. Several board members were already pulling out their phones, texting furiously. Next slide. Email threads between Robert and Veronica Hayes, discussing the offshore accounts, the fake pregnancy, the forged signatures. Each email header intact, IP addresses traced, metadata verified. That woman, I pointed to where Veronica sat in custody near the door, was paid $3 million to fake a pregnancy and help steal from my mother's inheritance. The ultrasound images appeared on screen next, one labeled Mercy Hospital 7 months, the other Data Forensics Analysis, image digitally altered, originally 4 months. Then came the security footage Patricia had pulled, Robert in my mother's home office at 2 a.m., removing documents from her private safe, photographing her signature, replacing papers with forgeries. James Morrison stood slowly, his presence commanding the room's attention. I've reviewed this evidence with my personal legal team. Every piece is admissible, every document authenticated. Robert Thompson has betrayed the fiduciary duty he owes to shareholders, to his family, and to his father's legacy. The final slide appeared, a screenshot of the Washington State Attorney General's website. Case number 2024 CV 4578, State of Washington versus Robert Thompson, Criminal fraud investigation opened November 27, 2024. The room went silent. James Morrison's voice cut through the silence like a blade. I motion for the immediate removal of Robert Thompson as CEO of Thompson Holdings, pending criminal investigation. I second the motion, Patricia Smith announced. The financial evidence alone warrants immediate action. One by one, board members stood. Jonathan Hayes, Richard Martinez, Susan Walsh. Then others, people who'd been silent for years under Robert's iron rule, finally finding their voices. All in favor? Morrison called for the vote. Hands rose throughout the room. I counted 32 shareholders representing 67% of company shares. The 60% threshold required for emergency removal had been exceeded. Motion carried, Morrison announced. Robert Thompson, you are hereby removed as CEO of Thompson Holdings, effective immediately. Security guards entered, not the building's regular team, but professionals Morrison had hired, anticipating this moment. My father stood, his face cycling through rage, disbelief, and finally, desperate calculation. You can't do this. I built this company, 25 years of my life. Your father built this company, Morrison corrected coldly. You corrupted it. You turned it into your personal ATM while destroying everyone who trusted you. He turned to me then, and for the first time in my life, I saw respect in James Morrison's eyes. Robert, you taught me everything about business, hostile takeovers, strategic planning, market domination. He paused. But your daughter? She taught me something more valuable. She taught me that integrity isn't weakness, it's the ultimate strength. The security team flanked my father. As they escorted him toward the door, past the shareholders he'd controlled for decades, past the board members he'd bullied into submission, he turned to me one last time. Please, he said, the word foreign on his tongue. Miranda, please. The same way you pleased Mom for 35 years, I responded. No. We're approaching the most crucial part, when justice finally gets served. Do you think Robert deserves what's coming? Comment justice if you support Miranda, or let me know which country you're watching from. And if this story inspires you, please share it with anyone who needs strength to face their toxic family. Now let's see how this ends. As security led him through the boardroom doors, my father made one last desperate play. He dropped to his knees, actually collapsed onto the marble floor, his practiced dignity shattering completely. This is my company, he screamed. 25 years. I saved it from bankruptcy. I made it worth something. You inherited a $200 million company and turned it into $450 million, Morrison said flatly. Your father built it from nothing to $200 million in the same time frame. The math doesn't support your ego, Robert. Veronica tried to run then, her red dress a blur as she bolted for the exit. Security caught her before she reached the elevator. He made me do it, she shrieked. I was just following orders. I can testify. I have recordings too. Save it for the FBI, Patricia said coldly. They're waiting downstairs. The boardroom doors opened again. The Seattle Times reporter stood there, camera already rolling, having been cleared by building security at Morrison's request. The headline would write itself, Thompson Holdings CEO removed in fraud scandal. My father looked around the room one more time, at the shareholders who'd once feared him, at the board members who'd cowered before his rage, at the empire he'd corrupted with his greed. His eyes finally landed on me. You've destroyed everything, he whispered. No, I replied, my voice carrying across the silent room. I revealed everything. There's a difference. As security finally removed him, dragging him to his feet when he wouldn't stand, James Morrison called the room to order. We need an interim CEO, he announced. I nominate Miranda Thompson. She's shown more leadership in the last hour than her father showed in 25 years. The vote was unanimous. Within 48 hours, the legal machinery had kicked into overdrive. The Washington State Attorney General's office, armed with our evidence, had frozen every account Robert controlled. $8.2 million in stolen funds were identified, traced, and flagged for recovery. The criminal charges were extensive. 18 counts of wire fraud, 14 counts of forgery, 6 counts of embezzlement, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud. Each charge carried a potential 5 to 10 years in federal prison. The FBI's white-collar crime division, thrilled to have such a well-documented case dropped in their laps, fast-tracked the investigation. Veronica Hayes, faced with overwhelming evidence, flipped within 12 hours. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal, full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. She provided 63 additional recordings she'd secretly made of Robert, insurance against the day he might betray her. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The conspirators had been recording each other. Court Order Number 2024 CV 4578 was signed by Judge Harrison on November 30th. Every penny of the stolen $8.2 million was ordered returned to my mother within 30 days. Additionally, Robert's personal assets were frozen pending investigation, ensuring he couldn't hide money or flee the country. Justice isn't revenge, I told the Seattle Times reporter during our interview. It's accountability. For too long, powerful men like my father have operated above consequences, destroying families while maintaining their public facades. That ends now. The newspaper ran the story on the front page of the business section. Daughter's recording exposes CEO's $8.2 million fraud. Within hours, it had been picked up by the Associated Press, Reuters, and the Wall Street Journal. Robert Thompson became the face of corporate corruption, his fall from grace complete and very, very public. My mother's liberation came in stages, each one more powerful than the last. First came the legal freedom. Sarah Kim from Kim and Associates filed for emergency divorce on November 29th, citing fraud, adultery, and financial abuse. The emergency order was granted within 72 hours. Robert had to vacate the family home immediately, taking only his clothes and personal items. I'll never forget the moment the locksmith finished changing the locks. My mother stood in her own doorway, holding the new keys like they were made of gold. "I haven't had my own keys in 20 years, she whispered. He always insisted on having copies of everything. The second freedom was financial. The recovered $8.2 million was deposited into accounts solely in her name, Margaret Williams, her maiden name restored by court order. For the first time in 35 years, she could buy groceries without explaining the expense, could write a check without seeking permission. The third freedom was professional. My mother had kept her law license current all these years, a small rebellion Robert never knew about. She'd renewed it online every year, paid the fees from her small personal account, maintained her continuing education credits through online courses taken while Robert was at work. On December 10th, Margaret Williams walked into the Washington State Bar Association and registered her new practice, Williams Family Law, specializing in financial abuse and divorce advocacy. "I know what it's like to lose yourself in a marriage," she told me that night, her eyes bright with purpose for the first time in decades. "I can help other women find their way out." The woman who'd apologized for existing just weeks ago was gone. In her place stood someone I barely recognized. My real mother, the one Robert had spent 35 years trying to bury. The board's decision to appoint me as interim CEO sent shockwaves through Thompson Holdings. The stock price, rather than plummeting as some predicted, rose 12% in the first week. Investors, it turned out, had more faith in transparency than in Robert's iron-fisted rule. The Forbes article that ran 2 weeks later didn't hurt. The whistleblower who saved Thompson Holdings. How Miranda Thompson's courage prevented a corporate collapse. The piece detailed how my evidence had prevented a potential bankruptcy that would have destroyed thousands of jobs and millions in shareholder value. 6 major companies reached out with C-suite offers. Chief Marketing Officer at Microsoft, Chief Strategy Officer at Amazon, CEO of a promising biotech startup. Each offer came with compensation packages that dwarfed what I'd been making at my own consultancy. But I wasn't ready to leave Thompson Holdings, not yet. There was too much repair work to be done. My former team at the marketing consultancy sent a massive bouquet with a card that simply read, "Finally, a boss with a spine, we're proud of you." Several employees from Thompson Holdings stopped by my office, formerly Robert's office, to share their own stories of his abuse, manipulation, and threats. The pattern was clear. My father had built his empire on fear. The ultimate irony came when the Seattle Business Association formally revoked Robert's Father of the Year award from 2019. The letter, which they copied to me, stated, "Recent revelations about Mr. Thompson's conduct are fundamentally incompatible with the values this award represents." I didn't want his position, I told James Morrison over coffee. I wanted justice. "Sometimes," he replied, "getting justice means taking power from those who abuse it. Your grandfather would be proud." The domino effect was immediate and far-reaching. Within 2 weeks of Robert's removal, 3 other Seattle corporations launched internal investigations into CEO misconduct. The phrase "pulling a Thompson" entered the local business vernacular. It meant getting caught in your own web of lies. Washington state legislature fast-tracked new protections for marital assets, specifically addressing the loopholes Robert had exploited. House Bill 2847, informally known as Margaret's Law, required both spouses notarized consent for any transfer over $10,000 from joint or trust accounts. It passed unanimously. At Thompson Holdings, we established an independent ethics committee with rotating membership and direct reporting to shareholders. No CEO could ever silence them again. We also implemented mandatory whistleblower protections that went beyond federal requirements. Any employee could report misconduct anonymously, with guarantees of investigation and protection from retaliation. The cultural shift was palpable. In the first quarter after Robert's removal, we received 127 reports through the new system, not all serious, but each one investigated. 12 led to significant findings: managers bullying subordinates, expense account fraud, 2 cases of sexual harassment that Robert had previously buried. We cleaned house, and employee satisfaction scores jumped 340%. The Seattle Times ran a follow-up piece 3 months later. "The Thompson Effect: How One Woman's Courage Changed Corporate Culture in Seattle." They interviewed 5 other whistleblowers who'd found strength in my story to come forward in their own companies. "One voice started an avalanche," Patricia Smith told the reporter. "Miranda didn't just save Thompson Holdings, she gave permission for everyone who'd been silenced to finally speak up." The numbers backed it up. Corporate fraud reports in Washington state increased 340% in the quarter following Robert's arrest. The age of consequence had arrived. Robert's fall was complete and merciless. On March 15, 2025, Judge Harrison delivered the verdict: 7 years in federal prison, $5 million in fines, and lifetime prohibition from serving as an officer in any public company. The man who'd once controlled a $450 million empire would spend the next decade in a federal facility in California. His business license was permanently revoked. Every professional organization expelled him: the Seattle Business Council, the Washington CEOs Alliance, even the country club where he'd held court for 2 decades. The social infrastructure he'd spent 25 years building collapsed in months. Veronica Hayes, despite her cooperation, received 3 years probation and $500,000 in fines. Her testimony revealed the full scope of Robert's crimes, including tax evasion we hadn't even discovered. She'd kept receipts of everything, paranoid that Robert would eventually betray her. In the end, her paranoia was justified and useful. The contrast was stark. Robert went from an $8 million penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay to a 1-bedroom apartment in Tacoma, after his assets were liquidated for restitution. The man who'd never worn the same suit twice now worked at a call center, the only job he could get with his reputation destroyed. Security footage from his apartment building, leaked to social media, showed him begging a former Thompson Holdings janitor for a $20 loan. The janitor, whom Robert had once fired for taking an extra sick day to care for his daughter, walked past without acknowledging him. I don't take pleasure in his suffering, I told my therapist. But there's something poetic about him experiencing the powerlessness he inflicted on others for so long. She nodded. Justice often feels like cruelty to those who've never faced consequences. While Robert's world crumbled, our family began to heal. My mother's law firm, Williams and Associates, opened its doors in January with a mission close to her heart. She specialized in representing women trapped in financial abuse, offering sliding scale fees and pro bono services for those who couldn't afford representation. In her first year, she took on 20 pro bono cases. Women who'd been told they were too stupid to manage money, who'd had inheritances stolen, who'd been trapped in marriages by financial manipulation. She won every single case. Each victory feels like reclaiming a piece of myself, she told me over lunch one day, her eyes bright with the purpose Robert had tried to extinguish. We started attending therapy together, not because we were broken, but because we were healing. Dr. Martinez helped us understand the patterns, the generational trauma that Robert had inherited from his own father and passed down like a cursed heirloom. Trauma isn't inherited, Dr. Martinez explained, but patterns are. You've both chosen to break the cycle. Thanksgiving 2025 was everything the previous years hadn't been. 20 people gathered at my mother's house. Not Robert's house. Never again Robert's house. Uncle David carved the turkey. Aunt Helen led the toast. My cousin's children ran through the halls without fear of a harsh word or cruel comment. My mother had recreated her grandmother's turkey recipe, the one she hadn't been allowed to make for 30 years because Robert preferred a different seasoning. As she brought it to the table, she was crying, but for the first time in years, they were tears of joy. "This is what family really means," she said, looking around the table at faces filled with genuine love, not fear. When the lawyers contacted me about my $45 million inheritance from Robert's estate, money that would come to me regardless of his crimes, I knew exactly what to do. "I don't want it," I told them. "Set up the Miranda Thompson Foundation for Financial Abuse Survivors." The foundation launched with 3 goals: providing free legal representation for financial abuse victims, offering financial literacy education to help people recognize manipulation, and supporting legislation to close the loopholes predators like Robert exploited. I visited Robert once in federal prison. Just once. 15 minutes in a sterile room with cameras watching, guards standing by. He looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, his carefully maintained tan faded to prison pallor. "I forgive you," I told him. "Not for you, but for me. Carrying anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." He started to speak, probably to manipulate, to play victim, to rewrite history. I stood up and left. Those were the last words I ever said to him. The flying monkeys came next. Robert's business associates, distant relatives, even some family friends who thought I'd been too harsh. Each one got the same response. "Access to me is a privilege, not a right. This privilege has been revoked." I blocked numbers, filtered emails, set boundaries with the precision of a surgeon. The people-pleaser who'd spent 32 years trying to earn her father's approval was dead. In her place stood someone who understood that boundaries weren't walls to keep people out. They were gates to let the right people in. "You've changed," a former colleague observed. "No," I corrected. "I've become who I always was, just buried under other people's expectations." The lessons from that Thanksgiving turkey, stuffed with evidence, became my gospel, shared across 53 podcasts, 12 conferences, and countless coffee conversations with others trapped in similar situations. Recording wasn't about revenge, I explained on the Business Ethics podcast. It was about preserving truth when gaslighting tried to rewrite reality. When the law is your weapon, evidence is your shield. The universal truths I'd learned became mantras for others. Toxic family isn't destiny, it's circumstance you can change. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. Your silence will never protect you, it only protects the abusers. But the most important lesson, I told a room of 200 survivors at a conference, is this. The best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so beautiful, so authentic, so full of genuine connection, that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant to your story. The speaking engagements weren't about reliving trauma, they were about showing the path forward. Every story I shared came with practical steps: how to document abuse, which lawyers to call, what laws protected victims, how to rebuild after breaking free. One woman approached me after a talk, tears streaming down her face. "I've been recording my husband for 3 months. I thought I was crazy, paranoid. You've shown me I'm not alone." "You're not crazy," I told her, remembering my own doubts. "You're protecting yourself, and that's not just okay, it's necessary." By sharing my story, I'd given thousands of others permission to write new endings to theirs. Each person who found freedom added another crack to the wall of silence that protected abusers. "Your story saved my life," read one email. "Thank you for being brave enough to tell it." 2 years later, everything had transformed. My startup, focusing on ethical business consulting, hit $50 million in revenue its first year. Companies hired us specifically because of our reputation for transparency and integrity, the opposite of everything Robert had represented. The plot twist nobody saw coming happened at a charity gala in September. My mother, radiant in emerald green, announced her engagement to James Morrison. The mentor who'd stood up for us in the boardroom had become something more during long conversations about rebuilding Thompson Holdings. They'd found love in their 60s, proof that it's never too late to start over. "Your father would hate this," Morrison told me with a wink at their engagement party. "Good," my mother and I said in unison, then laughed until we cried. Robert was released early for good behavior after 5 years, but by then, he was a ghost. No one cared. The business world had moved on. Thompson Holdings was thriving under new leadership, and the Thompson name meant integrity again, not because of him, but despite him. "The best revenge," I told my team at our company retreat, "is no revenge needed. When you've built something beautiful from the ashes of what tried to destroy you, you don't need to look back." Thanksgiving 2026 brought 40 people to my home. My mother and Morrison hosted together, their joy infectious. The table overflowed with food, laughter, and most importantly, love given freely without conditions or fear. As I looked at the photograph someone took that night, 40 faces glowing with genuine happiness, my mother at the center beaming like the sun, I realized something profound. We hadn't just survived Robert Thompson. We'd made him irrelevant, and in the end, that was the greatest justice of all. This story is a reminder. You don't have to endure toxic behavior just because they're family. If you're struggling with family boundaries, know that your peace matters more than their comfort. Subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself. Comment boundaries if this story resonates with you. And remember, you deserve respect, especially from family. Stay